Okay, so we're all set. I've got a new project set up in my favorite IDE, which happens to be Eclipse, and it contains a public HTML folder that will hold all of our code. There's no files in there yet, but that'll soon change. Also, I've got a virtual host set up right here. That's still throwing a huge error, but that's because there are no files in our web root. So it's time to change that and bring in Codeigniter. I'll just go over to codeigniter.com and click that big old download button right here. I've unpacked the Codeigniter zip file, and let's just bring these folders into our public HTML directory. Now remember, if you're on Linux, you need to go into the application folder and make sure the cache and the logs folders are writable, because if they're not, you'll get a white screen of death. Now I'm on a Mac, so there's no need for that. Let's go back to the browser and see if our installation is working, and sure enough, we get a welcome screen. So it's time to do some configuration. Now, if we have a look at the folder structure, you'll see that the application folder and the system folder are both within the public root, which means they're publicly accessible. Now, that's a bit of a security issue, so let's just drag these up one level so that they're outside of the web root and they won't be accessible through a web browser. Now, of course, this will break our application, so let's fix that. Go back to the project and open up index.php in your public folder. Now scroll down to the bottom and make sure to update the path to the system folder and the application folder. Remember, they should be pointing one level up because that's where we moved them. Now hit save and check in the browser, and sure enough, we're up and running again. While we're at it, let's do some more configuration inside of index.php. First of all, I'm running PHP 5.3 here, and I don't want it to nag about not having a default date time set. So we'll just add that, Amsterdam. Now secondly, let's set up our environment. We want to be able to run this CMS on development servers, staging servers and production servers, but with the exact same code base. Now this is why we're going to dynamically set the environment variable here. Now there are several ways to do that. We could set it in an htaccess file, or we could use a server variable, but right now I'm just going to be very simplistic about it and just use the directory structure to define our environment variable. So first of all, we'll set a root variable that will hold the current directory name, and let's just dump this to the screen. Okay, so this is our root directory. Let's just copy that and create a switch statement here. So we know that when we're in this folder structure here, we'll be on the development server. Now we could do the same for a staging server, but since we don't have one, let's just set environment to production if we're not in this folder. Now let's just clean this up a little. Now the reason you want to set an environment is because you can have different configuration for each environment. For instance, different error settings or different database settings, stuff like that. It's really very handy. The first example is right down at the bottom here, where the environment constant defines your error settings. Let's just set this to all strict. Now, as you can see, when we're in development, error reporting is set to on, while if we're in production, error reporting is set to off. Now that's everything we need to set in index.php. Let's just close that out and go into the application folder, config folder, and open up config.php. Now we could set the base URL here, but most of the times Codeigniter will guess it correctly anyway, so we're not going to do that. And of course we do want to remove index.php from the URI. As you probably know, every request to Codeigniter runs through index.php. Now by default, that means you should include index.php into the URI. Now that doesn't make for nice pretty URLs, so most of the times we remove that. So let's go ahead and do just that. Create an htaccess file inside of your web root and create some rewrite rules inside of that file. I'll just use a snippet for that. Now first of all, we check if the rewrite module is loaded. Then we'll turn the rewrite engine on, and then we'll rewrite all requests through index.php, except if the request is an existing file or an existing folder. Now let's just save that and check inside of the browser. So what we're really looking at here is index.php / controller name / action name. And now let's see if it works without index.php. And sure enough, that all seems to work splendidly. Next in line is setting up the database. We'll go over to the application folder, go inside of the config folder, and there we have our database file. Now, of course, we will need different credentials for our development server and our production server. So what we could do is just open up database and set the database credentials based on the environment. But there is a much simpler way to do that. Let's just close all these files and create 2 folders. One will be called development and the other one will be called production. Let's move the database file into development and copy it into production. Now Codeigniter will decide which of these files to use based on the environment constant. So if it's set to development, it will look for a development folder and use the database file there. If it's set to production, it will look for a production folder and use the database file there. Now this doesn't only go for database files, but you can use this approach for config files, constant files, doctop files, and so on and so forth. So let's just quickly set up our database, scroll down and fill out the username, password and database name. Now we'll set pconnect to false and debugging to true because we're in development. We don't need caching and let's just set strict on to true. Now let's open up the production database file. We don't know the username, password or database. And I'm not really a fan of pconnect, so let's set that to false. We certainly don't want any debugging in the production server. So let's leave it like that for now. Now we know we want to do some custom configuration in this app. So let's just prepare by creating a config file for that. And let's call it CMS config. And we'll just start by adding a site name or something. And let's make sure we autoload that config file. Open up autoload.php, scroll down to the config files, and add CMS config to the array. And while we're at it, let's autoload database as well. Let's just go back one more time and see if we haven't broken anything. No, it's all running perfectly. So it's time to lay the foundation of our CMS, and we'll do that in the next video.